Yeah, welcome to another episode of the Racer X Exhaust podcast brought to you by Yoshimura, Onyx Maps, and Cardo Systems. I'm Jason Weigandt. We are whipping this one together unplanned, unsolicited. And when I say unsolicited, that means it's something that you did not ask. It's like when someone comes to your door and knocks on it and says, "Hey, would you like to buy this?" And you're like, "You're showing up unsolicited. I didn't ask for you to come here." Well, that's going to be the case because we're breaking down the 74th edition of the FIM Monster Energy Motocross of Nations that took place yesterday in Mantova, Italy. You may or may not have cared. I would actually venture to guess that you didn't care because Team USA didn't compete. And for that matter, the riders familiar to Americans that are from other countries like the Australians or Dylan Ferrandis, Marvin Musquin from France, Ken Roczen from Germany, they all did not compete. And then on top of that, several MXGP stars chose not to compete because their series is still going. And the likes of Tim Geiser and Roman Fevre, they felt it wasn't worth the risk to race the nations right in the middle of what is a very hotly contested championship. So maybe you didn't pay as close attention to MXON as usual, but you missed out because the racing was actually nail-bitingly close. There was some controversy, some drama, even a penalty involved for the winner of the event. If your main takeaway was, well, I heard Italy won, good for Tony Cairoli, there was a lot more going on than that. So I'm going to bring in Kellen Brauer, my associate here at RacerXOnline.com, who is an all-time MXGP fan. He really loves to break this thing down. He even looked through the rule book to determine if that ruling that determined the race win was fair or not. I'll bring him on in a moment. But first, a shout out to our sponsors. Yoshimura has been here since day one. They've got the RS12 exhaust system for your motorcycle, even if it's one of the brand new ones. Like it's available to order for the new Honda CRF 250R and RX. They, of course, were right there on the ground floor of the development of the current generation CRF 450R, including the Works edition of that bike, which comes with a Yoshimura exhaust system. And then there's a different one that they build that you can buy for your Honda, or conceivably you could put it on a Works edition one if you wanted to put a second different Yoshimura exhaust in a bike that already comes with one. It's available if you want it. They also make exhausts, of course, for Kawasaki's, Husqvarna's, KTM's, Gasgas, Suzuki, you name it, they've got it. Also specializing in street bikes as well. And that includes, I believe, close to the heart, a machine that they absolutely love over there at Yoshimura, which is the Honda Grom. So the 125 small four-stroke Honda, which has been revamped to a degree this year. It now has a 5-speed transmission instead of 4, higher compression, a little more power. Still looks cool and funky, and it's cheap. Yoshimura's got a great exhaust system for that. So check out yoshimura-rd.com. Nowhere to go with OnX Maps, the #1 off-road GPS app. Over 500,000 miles of trails and roads, open dates, and public lands. Actually, when we started this promotion for OnX Maps, we used to say 400,000 plus miles of trails. They've added 100,000 more trails to the maps in the short amount of time that we've been promoting OnX Maps. And you can easily view public and private lands as well as BLM and national forest property. If you're heading out of service, this is really cool. You could save the maps for offline use, which is something you cannot do with Google Maps or anything else that's built into your phone. You can also track your location. You can leave features and waypoints and notes for other people to read. Other people can leave notes for you. Go to onxmaps.com or OnX Offroad in the App Store. Highly recommend this one, regardless if you ride dirt bikes or mountain bikes, whatever it may be. It actually was developed out of OnX Maps, which was a hunting app as well. So you know that they have pinpoint accuracy if they're the choice of hunters. OnX Offroad to the App Store or onxmaps.com. Also brought to you by Cardo Systems. It's the pro's choice. Great communication if you're riding with your buddies, maybe on trails or on an adventure bike ride or on street bikes on the road. Or it's a great way to have rider to coach communication. Maybe your little rider is riding and you're trying to explain to him. Maybe your buddies are just out on the track and you're just trying to keep track of where you are. Helmet to helmet communication. I think kind of highly underrated. It can really change the whole experience of the sport. Go to cardosystems.com and we'll give you 15% off. Type in the code capital R, capital X 15. That's RX15, capital R, capital X 15. And cardosystems.com. And you'll get their digital mesh communication, crystal clear audio. My buddies have called me and I've had phone conversations with them while they're riding on the road on street bikes. And you think they're in their car with Bluetooth. It works that well. All right, let's get to the podcast. We bring in Kellen Brauer, and we're going to talk Motocross of Nations. Podcast. Podcast, 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 podcast. Okay, it's Monday morning. We were not planning on doing any videos today. Jason Weigandt, Kellen Brauer here from RacerX, but I have the nation's fever. I know, Kellen, you have the nation's fever. Probably nobody else has the nation's fever. Team USA wasn't in it, and they only had 5,000 fans in Italy, which is tragic, and they had terrible weather, which didn't help. They still had a spectacular ending. Tony Cairoli finally gets the Chamberlain Cup. Everybody's excited about that. That's awesome for Italy, but I feel like there's a million other takeaways from this race that no one else is going to talk about. So that's what we're going to do here.
Yeah, but I think the main takeaway that we should have from this is that, thank God, it was a good race, because if it was like a Netherlands walk away or an Italy walk away or something like that, there's going to be so many people that are like, well, what if America was there? What if Australia was there? It would have been a better race. It would have been this, it would have been that. So the fact that it turned into what it became, I think kind of saved the event in a way.
That's a good point. So that's what we're here to do. We're going to tell you all the stuff you might not have known. I don't even know in the United States, you can watch it with the MXGP TV subscription. It was on CBS Sports Network Sunday night. Maybe you watched it, maybe you didn't. Maybe you're saying if America's not in it and the Lawrence brothers aren't there, I don't care. But we're going to tell you how good this race actually was, and we're going to get in the seams of how the race was won and lost. They really just focus on the big picture. There's so much math and things that are going on in the three motos that I feel like a lot of stuff gets lost. I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll do this. The Netherlands were the favorite coming in, partially because we didn't even know what condition Cairoli was in. If Cairoli was 100% and hadn't crashed out of a GP the week before, was it actually pretty close on paper? You watch more GPs than me. If Cairoli was fine, which it turned out he was okay, was it going to be a Netherlands walk, or was it pretty close between the two teams going in?
I think going in, because of Rowan van de Moestijk coming off of his broken scaphoid only 8 weeks ago, like he had just come back for the MXGP of Sardinia, I think that there was a lot of question marks about where he was, and that is what pulled Italy to their level. Otherwise, I do think that this on paper looks like a Netherlands team that would have walked it, just because, I mean, Herlings and Koldenhoff, they always are fantastic at this race. It doesn't matter if Koldenhoff's had a bad season, he's going to show up and race this race well. And Van de Moestijk, I feel like on an MX2 power rankings level would have been like third at worst, fourth maybe, but then with the injury, it probably put him further down the list than you would have expected. So then you have Mattia Guadagnini on the Italian team that suddenly is, going to carry that program a little bit more, because he's going to be so much higher up the ranking than Van de Moestijk because of the injuries. So I think that is what leveled it out. Otherwise, it did look like the Netherlands had this thing on lock.
Okay, thank you. Perfect talking point. So the nations, I feel, to sum up in the big picture, you always look at the superstars and how well they did, but often the race is won and lost with your third guy or someone lesser known having a massively, surprisingly good day, or the other way around. So the Netherlands, Koldenhoff, in an interview after the race, even put it on himself. He said, I got no first turn crash. I couldn't come through in the first moto. He got 15th. He said, that's on me. But really, the Van de Moestijk, that's what did it. He went 18-20. And if your MX2 guy goes 18-20, you're putting serious pressure. Koldenhoff and Herlings have to be perfect, which is hard to do. They got 3 out of 4 motos really good, but Koldenhoff had one bad one. So to me, that's what it comes down to. Van de Moestijk, and his injury was that bad. Like this 18-20, is this like he blew it, or dude, he was just hurt? This is what he was going to do.
I think it was a little bit of he was just hurt. This is what he was going to do. I think he was going to be better in the second race, and then he had to pull in for goggles and then crashed right after that. And like it looked like he was maybe going to get somewhere 12 to 15, which would have been a little bit better. They could have dropped the 18 that he had in the first moto and taken the 15 from Koldenhoff as their worst essentially at that point. But then when they have to take the 15 and 18 from that first moto because he got 20th in the second moto, it just makes the math all that more harder. So I think it was just him being hurt and just not having the fitness at the moment.
Okay, so that maybe means that Koldenhoff, I'm like, well, Koldenhoff's trying to be the bigger man and put it on himself. But Van de Moestijk's results were worse, but maybe Koldenhoff knew, but the guy was hurt. Like, we can only expect so much out of him. We have to do our part.
Right. Well, when Koldenhoff, the last 2 years that they've raced this, goes 1-1-1-1, I'm sure he's pretty disappointed with a 15th. Obviously, I think that already put the mood on the back foot for them. I mean, Herlings, after he won the second moto, was even like, we're just hoping for a podium now. When coming in, I think 100% they thought they were going to win this thing pretty pretty easily, or at least, be the clear front runners. And then by coming into the third moto, they felt like they were so far on the back foot already.
Yeah. They're literally, after the first two motos, their scores were a moto win from Herlings, and then a 15th and 18th and a 20th for their other three scores.
Right.
That the Van de Moosdijk thing. Let me get to this first. The overall point I'm going to make is the MX2 class is so massively underrated with how important it is, because people always focus on the big superstars and the guys that win the motos, which are generally 450 riders. But the race can swing so big on your MX2 guy. So on that topic, was there talk of maybe Van de Wolf or Kai de Wolf, the other Dutch rider who's very young? Could he have raced instead of Van de Moosdijk?
Yes, there for sure was a lot of that. I feel like Dutch fans in general were a lot of skepticism from them about Van de Moosdijk coming into this. I think, coming into the season without any injuries involved or anything like that, you would put Van de Moosdijk ahead of Kai de Wolf right now. De Wolf is still a rookie. He's still learning. Obviously, he's contended for moto wins, which has been huge this year. But do you want to throw an inexperienced rookie into this type of, environment, especially trying to win it for the second year in a row for the Netherlands? I mean, there's a lot of pressure involved with that. So I think, there was a lot of skepticism that you should put Van de Moosdijk or take Vlaanderen off of 450. He just went 4-4 at Sardinia, put him back on a 250 like he was in 2019 and see how he does. Maybe he is suddenly the third or fourth best MX2 guy again in that group. But the team was selected. I'm pretty sure they even selected it before Van de Moosdijk got hurt. So they ran with it at that point. They didn't want to make any changes, and it still almost worked for them. But obviously, that was a huge weak link for them in the end.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at, right? So the takeaway is going to be, this is awesome for Italy, and Cairoli finally gets it. But what will be forgotten is, but the Netherlands had a guy coming off of an injury, and that really set them off literally on the back foot. And then there's a ton of other stories like this. So let's go to France. Okay, as usual, France is coming in. Maybe they don't have their best team. And then suddenly you're like, wait, they have a pathway. There is a pathway for them to get this done still, which is what they always do. Tom Vial was spectacular in the first moto, maybe could have won it overall on a 250. And again, if your 250 guy is on the podium overall in a moto, there's probably going to be like 10 positions between him and the other 250 guys. It's such a huge gain in the standings. Vial's bike broke in the second moto. If that doesn't happen, France with like their C team maybe wins.
Yeah, it's 100% accurate. I think Vial, he had an awful start in the second race for sure. So he would have had a lot of work to do, but I just don't see him not finishing the top 10 in that second moto. And then suddenly that puts their scores right in the mix with this 37, 38, 39 that we eventually saw out of Italy, the Netherlands, and Great Britain. And like you're saying, the MX2 rider is so critical, and Vial is a great starter. He puts himself out front. He almost won the first moto. He definitely could have done the heavy lifting for that team when Boisrome crashes in the second race. That could have been their drop score. I feel like Paturel definitely rose to the occasion this weekend for France as well. Like, he was kind of thrown into this a little bit last minute with Musquin pulling out, I think only 3 weeks ago now at this point. So somehow, some way, France, they just basically pull names out of a hat sometimes and still almost win this race every year. It's incredible.
Yeah. So, because in the third moto, they actually did well. They got a 9th out of Boisrome and a 11th out of Paturel. In race 3, that wasn't bad. If Vial has 2 really good scores and they get to throw away Boisrome's bad race in Moto 2, they couldn't throw that away, because instead they had to throw away Vial's DNF, which could have been really good if his bike hadn't broke. I don't know. And think about it. Yeah, so they didn't have Musquin. They didn't have Ferrandis. They have the MX2 points leader. He can't race because he's trying to protect himself.
Yep.
They couldn't have Romain Fevre. He's trying to protect himself for MXGP. There were like 4 good riders that couldn't be on the team. It's amazing.
I know. And the way that they were going down the list, I'm like, Paulin's going to make it on this team somehow. They're going to pull him out of retirement. They're going to put him on a bike. They're just going to say, please lead us to victory again. And I mean, he could have done it too, which is crazy.
Oh man, that reminds me. That's one of my favorite topics of this race. Like the dudes who you don't really see much anymore, but then they come out of the woodwork and they still race the nations every year and they're still good. I saw them interviewing Max Nagel of Germany on Saturday in the qualifying races. And he's like, yeah, I pretty much just teach riding schools now, but he's back for the nations, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. No,
There's
I love
so many of those. Like,
sure.
I did not know that Valentin Guillaume was still a full-time racer, and he got second in the second moto of this race.
I know, it's so crazy. Like that Swiss team, gosh, if you put Seawar on that team and put Guillaume on a 250 or something like that, suddenly we're looking at that team as a potential winner too. I love this race because there's so many weird storylines, like you're saying, like that random guys almost at this point show up and pretty much carry a nation into a winning situation. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's like your annual check-in. You don't see these guys all year. So you're saying Guillaume doesn't even race GPs full-time anymore, and he is good here.
Yeah, that team that he and Tonis are on, it's the Hostetler Yamaha team. I think Hostetler's like a Swiss watch company or something like that. So they're both kind of contracted to race these Swiss nationals, and Guillaume's been doing great in them this year. Tonis is actually kind of the big question mark, I felt like, coming into it. But then even he whole shot a moto and ran up front like normal Tonis that we expect out of him. So it's really weird.
Yeah, forward out for the Swiss team. You know, when they had Tonis on the rise and Guillaume was kind of more in his prime and Seawar was really good, you know, if the stars had aligned, I always felt like they could make a run to win this event, but it just takes so much luck and it never worked out. Kind of like New Zealand back in the day, right? Like if you could have gotten the right guys in the right year, but someone would always be hurt.
Well, I mean, that's kind of Italy too, like Cairoli with Guarneri and Cairoli with Philipparts and Cairoli with Lupino, but they'd never had an MX2 guy or an open guy to help carry them to this level. So finally he gets a supporting cast around him and it works. But like you're saying with the Swiss, like it seems like that with a lot of these countries where they're just missing like one piece of the puzzle every year.
Yes. Okay, so we'll get into this Italy win now. So so much of this swings on two first turns. We'll get to the third moto first turn and the penalty, which I'm sure is controversial, in a bit. But let's go back to the first moto. You end up with Cairoli and Koldenhoff, who are two of the biggest stars. I'd say with so many guys that didn't participate, Cairoli, Koldenhoff, and Herlings are probably the three biggest names in this event this year, probably, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, there's factory guys like Jasikonis, Thomas Kjærulsen, that race this event. But I would say that in terms of your high-end level GP guys that you would expect to run up front on a 450, those for sure would be the guys that I would put there.
Right. So you end up with Cairoli, who's Italy's star, and Koldenhoff, who's been the master of this event, both down. And who would have thought that if you tell anybody that the one throwaway score Italy is going to have to use comes from Cairoli and they win, that's unbelievable.
I know. Oh man, it was incredible. It was really interesting to see. I felt like on Saturday with the track drier, it was still a very difficult track to pass on. Like it seemed like it was very one line. And then it just was so much more exacerbated by the rain, because the second you went offline, you were just sloshing around. So those guys starting dead last, I mean, they were going to always have to do so much work to even make it into basically the top 20, which both of them kind of did. And then Cairoli had to stop for goggles. But like you're saying, like Cairoli being the drop score is incredible. And it seemed like that was going to be almost a dagger for Italy, because if Cairoli doesn't go out there and go 1-1, 2-1, 1-3, something like that, are you sure that this cast of guys is still going to be able to get it done? I wasn't too sure after that first moto.
No. So what really did it for Italy was, again, the MX2 performance. And credit to our guy, Jason Thomas, on the broadcast. He kept saying that the MX2 performance from Italy, that's what really carried them. They got a 5-6 out of their MX2 rider. And to me, that's what really did it for them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you were saying at the beginning, the MX2 rider it's so important, especially because you just factor in how many 450 guys between Guadagnini and Van de Moostijk, or Guadagnini and Everts for Belgium. Those guys factor in so much. So if they can start up front and run with the 450 guys for a long time, like Guadagnini did, it puts them in such a better situation points wise, because they can drop a 450 score. And then those 450 guys in the final moto don't have as much of the burden. Like we saw with the Netherlands, those guys had to go 1-3 or 1-2 to even have a shot. Whereas Italy, they could definitely kind of relax on the scores that they got out of Guadagnini.
Yeah, it's a weird deal. So back in the day, they used to score each class individually, regardless of where you finished overall. Like they would, if you're on a 125 and you were the third 125 rider across the finish line, you scored 3 points for your team, even if you finished 15th overall.
Yep.
Somewhere along the way, I think in the 250F era, I guess I don't know why they did this, but I'm going to assume they're like, the difference in the bikes isn't enough anymore. You just race who you race. So the difference between having a guy that's unbelievable, has a great day on his 250F, and a guy who's just okay, Well, I'll give you an example. Guadagnini got 11 total points scored. He was second overall in MX2. The third rider got 22 points scored. So he was 11 points better than the next best 250 rider. That's a massive advantage. So Cairoli, meanwhile, that first turn, we didn't really have a good angle on it, but that first turn of the first moto, that had to be controversial. The teams elected to give both Koldenhoff and Cairoli the bad gate picks. They were on the outside. From what I could tell, it looked like Koldenhoff was like, I'm just going to try to send it from the outside. And, that's 50-50. It didn't work that time.
No, I think both of those guys, they out jump everybody around them out there because they're the only two guys pretty much on factory bikes on the outside. So the second they get a little bit of free room on either side of them, I think in their mind, it clicks like I can send it into this first corner and maybe come out top 5 or even whole shot. But I don't think any of those guys factored in was how sloppy that first corner was going to be, because it had been raining for 2.5 hours after the B final was over with nobody going through that stretch of the racetrack. So they get on the brakes in a normal distance, I should say, to the first turn, and then immediately run out of room because they're basically just hydroplaning into the first corner. But yeah, I think that was Koldenhoff saying like, I'm just going to hold it on and hope I can hit this embankment and not go down. And Cairoli was just a passenger at that point. What are you going to do? You got Koldenhoff just going straight into the first corner.
Yeah. And to defend Koldenhoff a little bit, he did the exact same thing in the third moto, where again, he was given the outside gate and it actually worked. Like you can see a picture of him using the bank on the outside of that corner and bouncing off of it, not crashing, and getting a good start from like whatever they would have had, the 23rd gate pick or something like that. So it could have worked.
Yep.
So
I mean, that first corner just it sets that up because they have that embankment on the outside. I think if they didn't have that embankment, you'd see a lot more of like a normal first turn, everybody getting on the brakes, trying to make it to the inside. But because that embankment is out there, even the guys on the inside, like you saw Tonis and Guillot getting their hole shots. I mean, they were inside gates and just went right to the bank and banked off and then got the hole shot. So everybody does it.
Yep. Okay, so we move to the crazy third moto where, so Italy has a huge lead, and technically on points, France and Belgium and even Russia were kind of in it, but I wasn't really buying that because I felt like Belgium was only in it because everybody else was doing terribly. And I'm like, hey, if Italy's surely not going to get another bad finish out of Cairoli. They gave him the good gate. I'm like, they're going to be fine. France's best weapon was the MX2 rider. Vial was already done for the day. So I'm like, dude, Italy pretty much has this. And then they do get good starts out of both Cairoli, and somehow I'm like, oh, Lupino's 7th with the bad gate. I didn't know how he got that 7th place start. And then, dude, the replay was bad. When they showed the replay of him cutting the start, I'm like, dude, he probably should have started last, and he started 7th because he cuts off a lot of racetrack.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely like freeze framed everything and went back and read the rules and how this all shakes down. I think the huge thing that you need to point out in the Lupino situation is that he enters the corner alongside Jasakonis. Like they are making contact going to the first corner. And I'm pretty sure that's why Lupino went over the embankment. Like it was basically Koldenhoff and Cairoli, except for he got stood up, whereas Cairoli just went down with Koldenhoff. And so Lupino went straight. But Jasakonis came to a dead stop because, like I was saying, everybody on the inside just pushes to this embankment. And Jasakonis, even though he entered the corner like 8th, comes out 35th because everybody comes to a dead stop and he's suddenly the odd man out on the far outside of the turn. Whereas Lupino, like you said, he hopped the embankment and then rode down the right side of the track on the pit straight into what is the second corner, and then hopped back on right before the little tabletop out of that corner. And when he rejoined, he was roughly right alongside Koldenhoff, who was in 7th. So you look at that and you go, man, he's on the outside of Jasakonis, who comes to a dead stop and leaves the first turn in like 35th. But then he rejoins the track in like 7th place. So it looks really bad. But then you're also like, well, he left the track while he was in like 9th and rejoined in 7th. So how do you do this? How do you score this? Do you take it literally that he left the track in 9th and rejoined in 7th and dock him those 2 positions? Do you take it like figuratively that he would have actually been in 36th but 7th, and then you have to dock all those positions? I mean, it is a wild scenario to try to figure it all out.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't make the rules based on this, but on this particular track, in this weather, the cutting the track to get a better start is an even bigger advantage
Yes.
than it would be another event. And when you see that world-class guys like Cairoli and Koldenhoff cannot make passes, like if they're in 20th, they just are going to finish 20th. You're like, dude, you would gladly there's almost no penalty besides DQ that would make up for passing 30 guys in the second turn of this race.
Exactly. I think that is what the Netherlands wanted, really. They went to protest. That is how this whole thing started getting on the radar. And then halfway through the moto, we find out it's a 10-place penalty, which I've heard some people saying that that's the max penalty that they can give for this situation. But I've looked through the rule book as much as I can, and I don't see anything that says a max penalty. Real quick, the rule that applies is it's section 2.10 subset 28 of the FIM Motocross of Nations rulebook. And it says the penalty for gaining an advantage while off course during races will be the loss of the number of positions gained plus one additional position in the final results of the respective race for the rider in question. If no positions were gained, the penalty will be loss of one position. So again, that's where it's like such a gray area. Did he gain 28 spots? Did he gain 3 spots? And then they just settle on 10 somehow. Like it's such a random number, it seems like. But I mean, I guess in the end, it worked out perfectly for them just in time.
Well, I do want to point out, first of all, I had some people text me and they're like, well, of course, they only penalized him just enough for Italy to win. But that's not true, because they were calling the 10-position penalty midway through that moto. And at that time, that was enough positions for Italy to lose the event. If you didn't watch it live, you might think after the race they did the 10-spot penalty. They called that during. And at that point, I think they were 2 points down because they would have lost a tiebreaker. They were a point behind and they would have lost a tiebreaker. So what the penalty was enough in the moment. They weren't handing them the trophy, at least automatically.
Right. And I struggle to come with a good answer for this one, but I do see often, and it's not necessarily in motocross, I see it more in like MotoGP or F1, where people are annoyed at a penalty that's given after the race because they feel as though riders didn't get an opportunity to race it out, whether it's like a 10-second penalty or a stop and go or something like that. So I personally believe that it's good that they did give a penalty during the race, so the Italian team knew like what needed to be done to still win. Because imagine if they didn't, and that entire time Lupino's just like, I just got to stay on 2 wheels. I'm in a good spot. I'll let Sabalos go. I'll let Brilyakov go. I can finish 9th. It's not a big deal. And then they get a 10-place penalty afterwards and lose it on that. I mean, it'd be crushing. It'd be devastating for them. So in one hand, I think it was the right move to give a penalty during the race to let them race it out. But I mean, afterwards, in hindsight, maybe the penalty should have been worse.
I agree. It made their event much more fair and exciting. The fact that they knew, Team Italy knew, and then they were telling him, you've got to make passes. That's much better than ripping it from their hands after. So I totally agree with that. I think the real problem here with the rule is that rule basically makes sense. You know, the one position more than you gained or whatever it is in the middle of a race. And that's probably what the rule is designed for. An off-track excursion in the first turn, that is in this case, a 30-position swing one way or another. You go off the track on lap 5, that's not the case. So it's almost like you need a separate off-track rule. And by the way, you also said you don't know if he could have got on the track any earlier. He almost had to cut all that.
Yeah, I mean, to be a little bit of devil's advocate here, I don't think he went off track on purpose. Like, I don't think that he stood it up and was like, I'm just going to cut the track. I mean, he got forced off. And then that embankment that we're talking about that everybody banks off in the first corner runs all the way down the pit straight into the second corner. And on top of that, there's those, endless advertising banners that they put alongside the track so that we can see it on TV because they face it towards the camera and stuff like that. In the way. So if he did rejoin at any point, there's zero question he would have been like almost dead last, because he would have had to do some sort of funky, like crossing over the sponsor banners and then over the embankment weird thing. He might have gotten stuck. I mean, we don't know what was between all those sponsor banners. There might have been like a 8-foot deep puddle because of all the rain or something like that. So I feel like if you're Lupino, you almost did the best thing that you could do in that situation, which is just ride along the side of the track and rejoin at the next safest spot. The only thing I think he probably did wrong was go too fast, basically from point A to point B. Like, he has to be like first gear coasting and try to not rejoin like in the top 20, probably, after being forced off in the first turn.
Yeah, it looked pretty egregious, even though you're right. Like, technically, he probably couldn't have done much more. Like, he couldn't have gotten on the track any earlier, but it looked like he's trying to get away with it. That's what it looks like.
Yeah,
even though I'm sure he's just in the moment like, well, I don't have another space I can enter.
Mhm.
And we know, look, people are going to criticize the rulings here in the AMA in the US also, but most of the time they are deciding it based on how fast were you going when you were off the track. That's pretty much all they can. What else can you go by? Like if there's no other place to enter the track, well, the only determination of if you were cheating or not was you were forced off, you could not enter, were you gassing it or not? That's all they can go by. It's
Yeah.
really hard.
And I mean, you and I, we talked about this a little bit this morning too. The only thing that I found of recent memory that I could pull from is in 2018 at the Arlington Supercross. People will probably remember it from Martin Davalos flipping and crashing violently in the first corner after he was like pushed wide into the first turn. But on the outside of all of that was Brandon Hartraft, who's riding for the Cycle Trader Rock River team at the time. And he just got forced straight into the next lane of track. So as the leaders were coming by, Hartraft is like in the lead at that point. He slows down. He lets, I think, 3 riders go. He ends up in 4th, rides to a 8th place finish, but then is docked 11 positions afterwards. And it seems like based on the rule book in the US side, it's the same rule. It's the same how many positions you gain off track. You lose that many positions plus an extra position. So I don't know, how they even determine it in the first corner. Like where did he exit the track? Where did he enter the track? How many positions did he gain? How many positions should he lose? It's such a gray area.
Yeah, and if you think about it, if you make the penalty more than, let's say you make it 30 positions, a 30 position penalty, now it's that same thing. You are almost eliminating the rider's chance. So essentially, Lupino could put in the ride of his life from the back of the pack, past 30 guys to dig out the win for his team. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. You're going to get a 30 position penalty. Anyway, like you're completely taking it out of the rider's hands.
Right.
Because in that case, it'd be like, well, maybe I would have started 34th. I still could have got 12th, but you penalized me 30 positions.
Well, that's the thing too, is that if you talk about what happened in the first corner, aside from Lupino, you got Jasikonis coming through it basically 35th because he was completely stopped. And then Kjær Olsen crashed in the first turn. And then they finished 13th and 14th, I think. And Olsen had even gotten up to like 10th or 11th and crashed with a couple laps to go. So I wouldn't necessarily put Lupino exactly on those guys' level. I think he could, probably get into the top 20 rather easily.
Right.
But, just say give him 16th in that situation and Italy still wins. So, I mean, it's depending on how you want to slice the penalty versus where Lupino may have ended up versus where he may finish. Obviously, he has to pass a lot more guys. Maybe he has to stop for goggles. It's a whole different situation. But I think in the end, he kind of ended up in the results, maybe exactly where he would have ended up had he been stopped in the first corner anyway.
Yeah, with the 10 position penalty. And that would be the goal, right? To try to replicate it. If you give it a 30 position penalty, it's like you're basically saying your race is done. Go ahead, put in a hero ride. We're going to penalize you so much it won't even matter.
Yep.
That seems a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to say the word unfair because depending on what side you're on, you're going to say it's fair or not. But I feel like they tried to put it in his hands. And then to add to this, Lupino, in one way, he's a hero. He logged a great ride, and it was all on him to deliver. But then he crashes. He's trying to pass people inexplicably that he didn't need to pass at the time. And then he puts on some of the worst, by style points, riding I have ever seen. He was riding horribly, but actually making passes. All the drama was on Lupino because it's like Cairoli's going to get second. He can't catch Herlings. It was both the worst and best moto ever that someone could put in for Lupino.
I would just have loved to been inside of Lupino's head for like the last 20 minutes of that race because at one point, I don't know how he felt about the first turn cut. Obviously, we don't know whether he thought it was fair or just or whatever. He's never said anything about it one way or the other. I'm sure he probably won't because he doesn't want to even stoke the flames at this point. But at one point, like you said, he's trying to pass Sabalis for 6, I think. He doesn't need it at that point in time. They don't know there's a penalty. So this is just like making passes going forward. And he crashes and he hits his head pretty good. And then you have Malin and JT on the broadcast saying like, is he slightly concussed? Like he's making a bunch of mistakes. He almost tips over in the next corner. And then you have the Italian team in the pit lane screaming like, you've got to go past these guys. And everybody's hanging out. So Lupino's got to be like, I just crashed. I got to pass this guy. What position am I in? How much more passes do I need to make? Like he is probably losing his mind in so many different regards for the last 20 minutes of that moto. It was insane.
Yeah. And he's probably he had the crash and you see his head violently snap back and hit the ground. So it's like That could be the concussion. Has he hurt his neck? And then he's riding all bobblehead, like he's literally riding like this through sections. And he has the world's longest extender of his helmet visor, which is only accentuating how much his head is bouncing around.
I know. Oh man, it was wild. Like that was one of those, like your heart is like kind of racing for the team, for the moment. And you're not like, this isn't us trying to cheer for Team USA or anything. Like this is a totally off kilter race for any American fan, but you're just like, this is wild how this is all unfolding. The drama, it was like almost scripted, it seemed like.
Yeah, and unfortunately, really, I got to say, unfortunately, it came down to a 1-point win, which is going to make that penalty look much more controversial. And I don't think, again, they made the penalty before they knew it would be 1 point. So I don't feel like they made it up just for Italy to win. But it doesn't, in this case, when you're trying to decide what's fair and what's foul, a 1-point victory is exciting, but it probably is just adding to the controversy.
Yeah. What I'm really confused about with the whole thing, though, is that it seemed like from the get-go almost that Malin knew it would be a 10-place penalty. Like it seemed like 25 minutes are left in the moto. They haven't even discussed a penalty. And then Malin's like, well, it might be 10 places. So I don't know if there's a precedent here that somebody went off in the first corner at a GP in like 2016, and this is the penalty they were given. But it does seem odd that so many people knew it was going to be about 10 places, and then that was the penalty that was given out. And now a lot of people are up in arms. So I'm very confused about how they came to this decision in the end as well.
Yeah, I was really worried because at the end, last lap, Lupino almost crashes again. He had to pass two guys. He passes them. They almost get him back.
Yeah,
wobbling across the finish. I think he panic revved and almost went down in going into the last turn. Did you catch that? He almost wadded it again.
Yeah, I mean, but the whole story of Lupino through the entire second half of that moto, like it was, gosh, it's just, if you were there and an Italian fan, your heart must have been beating out of your chest, knowing probably what the announcer's telling you about the penalty and where Lupino needs to finish, and you're counting the positions as they come. Like it's heart and mouth stuff for sure.
So that's the unfortunate thing. That's why we're doing this show, because we know that with the Nations, the Team USA not being there, people probably don't care, but it was this exciting. I was going to say it's almost criminal that they start celebrating instantly as soon as they come across the line. I'm like, do we know this is the real penalty? I was worried. Right.
I was too. And I felt the worst for Cairoli, because none of this is his doing, none of this is his fault. He wasn't the one that went off the track and cut. It wasn't like Team Italy devised this thing and Cairoli was in on it or anything like that. And for the amount of times that Tony has had bad luck at the Motocross of Nations, for it to feel like finally some good luck came his way in this regard, like you got to feel very happy for him, no matter what you feel about the Italians and what happened in that situation. I would have been devastated if Tony felt like he finally ticked this one off the box, and then after all this is over and the dust settles, they take it away from him. That would just be gut-wrenching for him.
Absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to Guadagnini. Am I saying that right?
I say Guadagnini. Some people say Guadagnini. I don't know. It's two different flips of the coin, I feel like.
I just want to give him credit for having the proper reaction. The dude was crying. The guy was in tears. It meant a lot to him. They don't make money from this. Their team, I always think the riders' teams are based around winning titles and races, not necessarily the nations. This is just all personal passion. He was so elated, so emotional, like crying. He was selfieing the entire podium just to soak it up. So I think that's awesome. One other thing I want to mention. Okay, so Team USA, we know how the fans are. If Team USA loses, we don't care about podiums. Second, third, that's garbage. It's win or go home for Team USA. I'm always surprised with a lot of these European teams saying, oh, we'd like to be on the podium. At least we got on the podium. You saw Jeffrey Hurlings on the podium. Yeah, podium was not doing it for him.
No.
He killed everybody. He dominated the two motos. They got second. He was bummed.
He was bummed. And I mean, the one thing he can take away from it is that he's been trying to go 1-1 at the Motocross of Nations for like 5-6 years now. Finally got it done. But I do think that a little bit of their frustration at that specific point in time is they probably came off the track in the heat of the moment and then heard about the Lupino situation and the penalty there. And then raw reaction obviously is like, well, why isn't the penalty worse? I'm sure the Netherlands team was rather upset at the penalty to some degree. So I'm sure that those guys felt like it was such a bitter moment because they probably didn't feel like they lost fair and square. They felt like they were almost cheated in a sense, like a lot of people are saying that they feel right now, you know?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So it's not just I dominated and our team lost. It was also we shouldn't have lost. We lost controversially. So
Right, because I mean, like, look at Great Britain. They arguably could have won as well. You put
mhm,
Watson in, maybe second in that moto if he doesn't crash halfway through the third moto. Maybe he
yep,
runs Cairoli down and passes him while Cairoli's trying to manage, and
yep.
he gets
And
into
Crowley
second
wasn't
place.
quite normal Crowley. I know people are like, Watson's going to pass Crowley. He was hurt a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, Watson was going faster than him the whole race. He
hmm
crashed, was down for like 20 seconds, and then finished 11 seconds behind
Yeah.
Cairoli in the end. But you put him ahead of Cairoli in that situation, leave Cairoli between himself and
Koldenhoff.
Koldenhoff,
Yep.
and Great Britain beats the Netherlands on points. And then, depending on what this Italy situation is,
Yes.
they could have won as well. But Watson and really the British team was over the moon to be on the podium again. They're like, we got third again. Watson won the MXGP class overall. Like, those guys were stoked. Very opposite to what the Netherlands felt like finishing second. And I do feel like that probably played into it a little bit with the penalty.
Yeah. Yeah. The penalty for sure. And I think Hurlings and even Koldenhoff are smart enough to know like it's so hard. Like we just talked about at the top of the show. The Swiss, like you get this rare moment where you have good enough talent to win this thing. You've got to try to get a bunch. And Netherlands
Mhm.
has got one. They probably should have won Redbud. Maybe they would have won last year, but they didn't even hold the event. They were probably the best team this year. They didn't win. They're probably looking at, dude, we only get a window where we have Koldenhoff and Hurlings for so long. We need to get 2 or 3 or 4 of these, and another one slipped away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the one plus side to that whole situation though is that with Van de Moosdijk, with Kai de Wolf, I mean, depending on
Mhm.
how long Hurlings goes, like
Yeah.
the Dutch really do have a strong future in this event that I don't feel like they had before. Like you go back to the De Ruyter days and they did well, but I don't think
Yeah.
that anybody really expected them to ever win. Now these expectations are a lot higher, and I think that's why the pressure that you see that Hurlings and Koldenhoff put on themselves, where Koldenhoff, whether they knew about the penalty or not, puts all the onus on himself. Like he
Yeah.
basically said, I blew it for the team. Those guys feel like they need to win every time they come out now. And it's a way different scenario than they've ever had as a country, really.
That sums it all up. This really meant a lot to a lot of people. I know not to the American fans. We didn't have Team Australia. We didn't have the great French riders. We didn't have Tim Geiser, all those guys, but it was still awesome. It was still exciting. That was the point we were trying to make here. It meant a lot to somebody. That's for
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
It was very exciting. I don't think I woke up and expected to have 3 different countries end up 2 points apart in the end
No.
for the win, but hey, we got it.
We got it. All right, good stuff, man. The nation still matters, even if Team USA is in it. So I hope everybody enjoyed this little analysis so you understand what you missed. Cool. All right. Thanks.
Awesome.